Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. India's top-tier educational institutions could soon get full autonomy under a major structural reforms blueprint that seeks to do away with outdated regulations and assure quality higher education. A high-level committee set up by the Prime Minister's office has drawn up a set of short-term measures which can be implemented through executive orders and would not require legislative changes to transform the sector in a time-bound manner. Some of the immediate measures include granting graded autonomy to universities, opening up the accreditation process to third-party agencies via the Accreditation Advisory Council, and improving effectiveness of UGC's existing scheme for autonomous colleges. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the reforms listed out by the panel for higher education. Joining me on the program today are Dr. Manisha Priyam, Senior Academic and Higher Education Specialist, Dr. Narendra Jadhav, MP, Rajya Sabha, and Mr. Jagdish Kumar, Vice Chancellor, JNU. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. And I'd like to start with the lady on the program first. Dr. Priyam, what ails the Indian higher education system?
I think when you've said what this government intends to do, I would see that as some of the stellar suggestions that would set really the roadmap for excellent performance and excellent institutionalism in higher education. The task, however, is far broader and vast than this. In the last few years, we've gone the road of massification. That has also meant that there has been a proliferation of low quality institutions. To rein in all of that is nearly an impossible task. Now, that may be the impossible task, but what is really required is that we improve the functioning, the institutionalism, the quality of what we have and what we know are good institutions, but do not fall anywhere in the map of being world-class institutions. So some of our institutions coming up to the quality and the benchmarks that are global in nature, that is extremely important. You would be highly surprised to know that a number of our African institutions, which were once below us, are struggling are going the route of institutionalization and world class. Their partners are China in this process and not India. Therefore, India has been waking up late. Having woken up late, these steps are in the right direction, and we would like to see with these, but these steps are very, very welcome.
Okay, the steps are very, very welcome. Dr. Jadhav, minor tinkering is enough at this point in time, or do we need large-scale reforms?
Certainly, these are most welcome steps, and there's no doubt about that. However, as was said earlier, while they are the move in the right direction, the real challenge is much, much bigger. This can be only a beginning of much bigger challenges. So what are the challenges involved? Just to give you a rundown of the number of challenges that the higher education reform requires. First of all, physical expansion is very important. Our GER, the gross enrollment ratio, is very low as compared to even the average for developing countries. So we need to expand a lot. That is first. Second challenge is very important, improving the quality of higher education, for which we require a strategic transformation of the university ecosystem. That is a very big challenge. Third one is metamorphic change is required in the paradigm of education. Fourth one is that there is a need for, there are limits to brick and mortar kind of expansion. So we need to use ICT. Extensive use of ICT is very much needed. Fifth one is a whole range of academic reforms needed. What is listed now in terms of accreditation is just a small part. We need lots of reforms in terms of the what is called academic reforms.
So big ticket reforms is what is required.
Right. And the sixth one is exploring the globalization opportunities which are coming our way. And the seventh one is financing issue as far as the higher education is concerned. So these are the 7 major challenges that we need to address. The moves that have been made now, they are moves in the right direction, but we really have a very long way to go.
Okay, fair enough. Professor Kumar, since you're part of such a prestigious institution, an institution that has been with us for several years now, do you believe that the right aspects have been touched upon by this high-powered committee?
Well, you see, in higher education, it is very important that big transformations take place. but it is also important that we take the first few steps. And that is where I think the new issues that are raised in higher education, they become important, what Professor Yadav has said just now. You see, in today's world, the economies are driven by scientific innovations and technological innovations. So therefore, it is important that we have good quality higher educational institutes where cutting edge research is done. And in this direction, I think the steps that are taken by the government are noteworthy. But at the same time, it is also important to note that all institutes cannot excel. So therefore, the government is thinking in terms of grading the institutes so that the better institutes can be given greater autonomy so that they get the opportunity to excel further. But at the same time, it is important to note that we also need skilled people in the country. There are people who are required for providing various services. And by nature, not everybody can be an innovator. Not everybody can be a person who provides only skills. So depending on their own the capacity and the ability to do certain scientific and technological work, I think we need to provide opportunities for people where some people are interested in developing their skills, they have that opportunity, and others who want to excel and innovate, they have the opportunity and the right kind of environment. So therefore, I think it is important that we should not just focus only on excelling and innovations. We also need to look at providing appropriate skills to the people so that they become tools for societal transformation.
Sure. I'm going to take the point that Professor Kumar is making forward, talking about innovation and not how everyone can be an innovator. But Dr. Priyam, do we have the right kind of environment to build these innovators and to create these innovators?
At this point, the clear answer is no. Universities are not centers of excellence. Even the best ones are not centers of excellence. Maybe there's something happening in the IITs, but we don't know. The IITs have for a long time been feeding the economies of the US and the West largely. What the singular innovation of any of these best institutions is in terms of our own landscape, in terms of our own country, I do not know. So in a sense, innovation as the spirit needs to be imbibed by the university. Innovation doesn't refer only or does not refer merely to scientific innovation. It means innovation of the arts, of the languages, of creativity. Look at the manner in which Indian arts, Indian creativity, Indian aesthetics, Indian music has actually flourished outside the university system. In the best of our universities, the best musicians come through SPICMAKE. They don't come through the university system. The best scholars on the Ramayana, for example, the University of Berkeley has a noted scholar who has some of the finest collections of the Ramayana itself. So I'm not just saying that innovation is only the scientific temper. Yes, it is, and the scientific temper is very important, but cutting edge knowledge develops in dialogue with all forms of knowledge. So dialogue needs to be the spirit of the university, innovation needs to be the spirit of the university, but that innovation has to be multi-pronged. In a sense also, apart from this, the best sportsmen, for example, are not being generated from our best universities. The IITs therefore are shop floor in a sense in terms of the knowledge that they have. Let our best sportsmen be created in the arena of the best universities. Remember, the blueprint of the university, the blueprint of the academia was laid as long back as 5th century BC by Plato himself, who suggested that the finest trainings in gymnastics, in music, in philosophy be provided by the university, which becomes the site for universal knowledge, and let it be that spirit which drives innovation. At this point of time, I would sadly say we are neither here nor there, but self-criticism, self-reflection is the role of the university, and to imbibe that for its own self is extremely critical and important.
Okay, fair enough. Very well, very well analyzed, and some very crucial, critical points brought up by Dr. Priyam there. Yes, Dr. Jadhav, you wanted to add something?
Sure. there is a comprehensive change required, a fundamental change is required in terms of our university ecosystem. Right now we have central universities, state universities, which incidentally are the mainstay, and that's where the rot is. And the third one is the state private universities and deemed universities and so on. This is the kind of caste system. We need to change that in terms of 3 different clusters. Move away from one size fits all kind of approach and have a cluster of 3 different clusters of universities. In my view, the first would be highly selective research oriented universities. They would be focused on generating the world class leaders in cutting edge research in multidisciplinary kind of areas, and they should also be involved. There would be less of teaching and more of research. These are the institutions which would aim at being in the top 100 or top 50 over a period of time. That's the first kind. The second kind of cluster should have professional education centered universities. These are the universities which would be creating or aimed at creating highly employable graduates in the emerging white collar jobs in the emerging knowledge economy, and they would also be highly skilled jobs in the manufacturing sector. So this second cluster would be catering to that. And then there could be a third cluster that would be liberal arts and basic sciences universities, and these would be most broadly based kind of universities where they are meant for expanding the reach of everybody who is interested in higher education. So it would be focused on holistic education for education for everybody.
Wouldn't such kind of a demarcation create some kind of a divide?
No, that kind of analytical divide is very important because right now, recently a decision was taken to create 20 universities and give them a status of eminent universities, 10 from public sector and 10 from private sector. Is that a caste system we are creating? No. Instead of one size fits all kind of approach, we are specializing in areas and creating institutions based on focus that is conducive to generating universities in the top ranking institutions.
Sure.
As you are aware, the latest survey, the Times Higher Education ranking 2018 shows that in the top 1,000 universities in the world, coming from 77 countries, only 29 of them are from India.
Yes.
And the very top one comes in the 351 to 400 range. I think this is something that got to be changed, and to change that, we need a fundamental change in the ecosystem of the university.
A fundamental change in the ecosystem of a university is what Dr. Jadhav is suggesting. But Professor Kumar, our universities seem to be using a tried and tested formula that has worked several years in the past, but doesn't seem to be working today. So do we then need to think out of the box and come up with some innovative ideas as far as these universities are concerned?
You touched upon a very important point, because you see, when compared to other countries, India faces a different set of challenges. Even today, nearly 25% of Indians do not have access to electricity. So how do we make them how do you make electricity accessible to them? A large number of population do not have access to good quality drinking water. They do not have access to good health facilities. So these are different kind of challenges. But then who will provide solutions to this? Only we have to innovate and provide solutions to this. So the another aspect that we need to see is that in our higher educational institutes, as one of the participants mentioned, this self-introspection, self-criticism is something that is lacking. So therefore, we keep on doing the same things that we do. We don't focus on the challenges that our country is facing and how to innovate and find solutions to this. This is one problem. The other problem is, of course, that when you talk about poverty, poverty is a result of inequality. So when you have inequality in terms of access to opportunities, then obviously that will lead to more poverty. So inequality in access to good education will lead to inequality in getting better jobs, therefore inequality in income levels, therefore it will further lead to poverty. Therefore, we must look at these challenges and see how we can come up with solutions to find solutions to these problems. Now, one more point that we need to keep in our mind is that we often think about how to bring some of our institutes into the top world rankings. Now, should we focus on that, or should our universities focus on finding solutions to the problems our country is facing? Imagine we have 10 best universities in the world, but then our country is still facing a lot of major challenges. On which one we should focus? So therefore, I think we should have a balanced view. We should not overemphasize on getting into the top world ranks. We should strengthen our universities so that they provide better quality education to a large number of students across the country and enable them to stand on their own legs. That should be our primary concern.
Sure. You know, coming back to what the high-powered panel has suggested as far as higher education is concerned now, Dr. Priyam, you know, one of the suggestions is full autonomy as far as some of these universities are concerned. How is that going to help really?
Well, it helps and it does not. It helps in the sense that, you know, it's often been the refrain of universities that there's too much political and bureaucratic interference. So in a sense, autonomy is thought of as that one-shot idea which is going to allow the universities to work as institutions in their own right. So it is considered a very shiny idea, but remember, autonomy as a scheme is something that the UGC has been struggling with since the late 80s, definitely the early 90s. I know of very top institutions in our country which have said, oh, we want to go the autonomy route. But when I've gone down on the ground and seen why autonomy has not worked in some of these institutions, you'll be surprised to hear what the battles are about. And as Professor Jagdish Kumar said, the small order also needs to be looked at. Can you imagine that our universities struggle over syllabi, struggle over exam papers? The enemies of autonomy very often have not been the politicians or the bureaucrats, but they have been enemies within. So autonomy is a shiny concept. It is certainly a concept that holds much promise, but it is not a one-shot thing. It requires certain scoping conditions. Autonomy works when institutions begin to self-reflect on their own practices, when institutions understand that they need to, in a sense, embrace their own counterfactuals. They need to, on their own, have external reviewers, on whether it be on their exam papers or it be on their, on their curricula committee. We may say the world class is a shiny idea, but in framing a curricula, just try and tell yourself anywhere in the world body of knowledge in this area or in this domain. That's a practice that you adopt when you're writing an academic paper. Why don't you do this? So we have to self-interrogate as academics our own practices and come up to understand what the scope, what the prerequisites are for autonomy. Very often, however much it is taunted, remember, politicians are not the enemy of autonomy. They don't come and interfere on a daily basis with universities. Much of what happens of our own doing. The other part is that much of the life world of the university is really not even about big money. It's really about sparking that critical knowledge. And autonomy for the university is integrally linked. Remember, the university is not the marketplace, it is not the corporate sector. The university autonomy has a very important linkage to its knowledge component, to its capacity to innovate, and its capacity to be able to embed itself in its own community. So our universities have to go the autonomy route. That is a sine qua non of good institutionalism, but nobody else can come and tell us that this is how you will walk that road. We need to self-interrogate.
Sure.
We need to honestly tell ourselves, why is it that we are battling over question papers? I understand that. We are ultimately battling we are battling over the control of the lab.
Right.
We are battling over appointments of examiners. So all these things will have to go through a fair practice interrogation and external and reflective interrogation of ourselves.
Okay, self-reflecting interrogation is what is required, is what you're suggesting. Taking the discussion forward, Dr. Jadhav, you spoke about big ticket reforms, in your opening remarks.
Yeah.
But what needs to be done immediately before the big ticket reforms to set our universities in order?
Academic reforms. Academic reforms are overdue. For example, take the case of the curricula. The curricula, in many cases, are not revised for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. The world is changing so rapidly, and there is a complete disconnect between what most of the state universities are teaching and what is required out there in the market, in the field. And therefore, one of the things that immediately needs to be done is to set in process a system where the curricula are revised every 3 years or shorter period, involving the industry experts. As the Vice Chancellor, as the former Vice Chancellor of one of the largest university, I can tell you that, in Pune University, we changed the 484 curricula at one go. It was a 2-year exercise. Now that is something which needs to be done on a massive scale. It should happen everywhere, and it should be available to everybody. What I'm saying is that there are n number of reforms which are required. Autonomy, can I make a comment on autonomy?
Sure.
Autonomy is not something that is given. Autonomy is something that needs to be taken, and that's where the responsibility is required. The intervention from politicians is always there, but it's not there on day-to-day basis. What is more important is that all the regulators, we have 15 different regulators in a higher education system. Starting with UGC to AICTE to,
yes.
All the letters are exhausted. There are so many of regulators, and the kind of regulations that they come up with. The real battle against autonomy is to be fought with the bureaucracy and not with the politicians.
Okay.
And there, I must mention this, that UGC always been resisting. The license Raj in the industrial sector was over in 1991 reform, but license Raj in education sector continues even today. For every small thing you have to run to UGC. What kind of thing that we are talking about? We need to move in the direction of autonomy, and that is long overdue.
Okay.
And if it is happening now, it is most welcome.
Okay, sure.
I would like to
Professor.
say a few comments on this autonomy. Autonomy seems to be a highly misunderstood word. In my view, autonomy in a university setup is usually reflected in 2-3 areas. One is, for example, improving the quality of education. Now, who stops us from revising our curriculum? Who is interfering with us? But the universities say we need autonomy, but they themselves are not revising the curriculum. They themselves are not improving the teaching standards. Now, in another area, the faculty recruitment, right? There are certain minimum standards that UGC has prescribed. And who stops you from raising the minimum standards and selecting the best faculty into your university? And after you have selected the faculty, who stops you from reviewing their performance and provide both rewards and also a kind of build-in the accountability in their performance? Nobody is stopping them. Now, another area is the funding for the university. Yes, government does give some funds, but who stops these universities and institutes in raising their own funds through consultancy, by having collaborations with industry and so on? There are various ways in which the internal funding can be raised. So these are the areas where autonomy is required,
yes.
And universities do have the autonomy, but unfortunately they are actually not using that autonomy in excelling and in taking the university forward.
Sure.
I think this accountability has to be built
Fixed,
into the system, and the autonomy will come automatically to it.
Fair enough. Dr. Jadhav, I'm out of time. Quick closing comment. Yeah.
No, the autonomy is a very important issue. I'll just give you an example. For certain kind of recruitment, the UGC requirement is that the candidate must have 1 book and 3 research papers.
Right.
Now, in one interview, I found that there was somebody who had 3 books and 5 papers. And they said, no, he is not eligible.
Okay.
Now, writing a book is a lot more difficult than writing
papers. True.
But, when you make rules like that, first of all, prescription of a rule like that is itself wrong.
Is absurd, yes.
Absolutely absurd. And we need to move away from that.
Okay, fair enough. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to thank all my guests, Manisha Priyam, Narendra Jadhav and Jagdish Kumar for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. See you again next time.